Welcome back to another episode of Archie Sonic Character Files as we explore the histories of the inhabitants on planet Mobius. In this episode, we take a look at the history of the last E-100 series robot known as E-123 Omega. With all the previous episodes I've covered on characters that originated from the games, it was inevitable that I would get around to covering Team Dark, or at least one of the members, and see how the Archie Sonic Universe handled these characters. So now we're going to be looking at the big guy himself for this. And I'll also be joined by a friend who will be sharing his personal thoughts as well.
Greetings, friends! Oh, that was weird. Anyway, hello, my name is Salacommander. I've been working with Melting Man 234 over on Roger's channel, where we're live every other Saturday for a show called Dissected Alive, where we discuss all things Sonic. Now, I'm not really as well versed in the Archie Sonic comics as my friend here, but when Melty asked if I'd like to guest star in one of his Archie Sonic character files, I knew the exact character I'd want to cover. Omega's actually been one of my favorite Sonic characters since his first appearance in Sonic Heroes, and it just so happened that in the brief time I was collecting and reading Archie comics, Omega made his long-awaited debut. But before we get into that, I know this isn't really how things are done here, but seeing as this is not only a special occasion but a rare opportunity, I'd like to take a moment to go over Omega's origins in the games before comparing to his origins in the comics. And trust me, this won't take long.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So, Dr. Eggman, or I guess we call him Robotnik here, Dr. Robotnik's E-100 series is a line of 24 different robots that were specifically designed to be more advanced than other badniks, with more advanced weapons, more durable armor, and much more advanced AI. The 24 robots, of which only 12 have ever been seen, are all named after the letters of the Greek alphabet. Starting with E-100 Alpha as opposed to E-101 Alpha, each robot's official designation is E-1XX, with XX being the number for their corresponding Greek letters positioned in the alphabet -1. Except for Phi, who didn't get this memo. Thus, as the 24th and final letter, we have the 24th and final robot, E-123 Omega.
Yep, that's quite the collection of robots there. Although personally, I consider the ones that were featured in the IDW Sonic comics to be its own separate thing, but whatever. Please continue.
Omega isn't just the last of this series, he's easily the most powerful. Robotnik really went all out on this guy, going above and beyond all of the previous robots by far. Omega is the strongest, the fastest, the toughest, and the thing he himself is most proud of, the most heavily armed. He doesn't even use a flicky or other animal as a battery like most of the others. Unfortunately for Robotnik, he was also the most intelligent, so when the Doctor locked Omega in a warehouse to guard the secretly rescued Shadow, Omega became furious that his talents were wasted on such a menial and uneventful task. So like his older brother Gamma, Omega swore revenge against his creator, and teamed up with Shadow and Rouge to form Team Dark, so that he could prove once and for all that he is the ultimate Eggman robot. And that's it. All of that in Omega's personal backstory is just that he was locked in a room and got mad. Now let's get on to the actual comics, shall we?
Right, it's time to focus more on how they handle that character in the Archie Sonic Universe. Omega made his first appearance in Sonic Universe Issue 3. Robotnik is fed up with Gamma still being alive and being a pest by destroying his E-Series robots and other machines. He decides to activate Omega, who was stuck in storage for over a year, and orders him to destroy Gamma. At first, Omega refuses, saying that his prime objective is destroying Sonic the Hedgehog, but he soon changes his mind when Robotnik threatens to put him back into storage. He manages to find Gamma, along with Shadow, who was sent on a mission to rescue the old robot. He makes quick work of Shadow and proceeds to chase after Gamma. After some dialogue between the robots, Omega proceeds to open fire on his brother. Despite destroying Gamma, it turns out the reformed robot managed to tap into Omega's networking system and leaves him the gift of having a soul. Now Omega is more tame in a way. All those missions of destroying good have now been replaced with thoughts of his own. Shadow suggests that he should join Gun like what Gamma would have done, and the robot agrees to this, especially if it means getting revenge against Robotnik.
This is an interesting twist on Omega's origins. Even though it still boils down to Omega is upset about his wasted potential, and his backstory doesn't exist further beyond that, here we get to see Omega interacting with one of his older brothers for the first time, and it's thanks to this interaction that Omega gains his free will, as he actually inherits Gamma's soul, allowing the fan-favorite character to continue to live on in some way. Gamma states through Omega that he may disappear as his code integrates into Omega's, but his mission and his soul lives on.
He later showed up in the next issue, first being a sparring partner in Gun's gymnasium, then later joining Shadow and Rouge to the Special Zone to obtain a Chaos Emerald. Feast, the ruler of the zone, challenges the team to find the emerald in a maze while being under a time limit. After running around for a bit, Team Dark manages to find the emerald and begin blasting away at the barrier containing it. Unfortunately, they fail when they run out of time. Fortunately, Omega doesn't take losing well and begins blasting the godlike being, giving Shadow and Rouge enough time to snatch the emerald and get out of there.
Ever get so mad about losing that you just shoot God in the face? That's Omega, alright. The fact that it works is also really telling. Omega's level of power is often overlooked, but his pride in his firepower is certainly not misplaced.
The next time we see Omega would be in the Treasure Team Tango story arc. Team Dark are on a mission from Gun to find the Soul Emerald that has showed up in Mobius. Omega quickly proceeds to open fire on Team Rhodes, who are in possession of the emerald. Shadow is freaked out about this, but Rouge reassures him that Omega did that just to scare them off and not actually hurt them. Despite this, Blaze attacks the robot with her pyrokinesis, and despite being singed, Omega develops an interest with her skill, wanting them both to burn things together. After some fighting, Team Rose managed to get away with the emerald, only for Team Hooligan to get it. Later on, Team Dark returns for round 2 against Team Rose, where Omega continues to fire and later grabs Cream, but he gets nervous when she begins crying. Once it's explained that Knack and the gang have the emerald, both teams agree to have a temporary truce, and later find Team Hooligan fighting with Team Babylon over the emerald. After the ultimate showdown of ultimate destiny, Team Rose managed to get the Soul Emerald back. Rouge demands to hand over the gem to her team, but Shadow and Omega have had enough with the fighting and tell her to let it go, especially when Omega doesn't want Cream to cry again. So Rouge reluctantly agrees and Team Dark heads out, but not before Omega timidly says goodbye to Blaze.
The interactions between Omega and Blaze are my absolute favorite part of the Archie iteration of this character. It's such a weird ship, but come on, this is so adorable. It's a shame that outside of one variant cover of Sonic Universe number 72, these two are never seen together again. But even then, look at this! The line between Omega and Blaze is already filled in, it's meant to be.
Next, Omega would make a small appearance in the Scrambled story arc. Robotnik has unleashed his robots and Dark 8 Legion members to cause havoc at Central City while searching for Snively. Omega leads the charge in fighting off Robotnik's army. At first, he takes some beating by some former gun soldiers who have been legionized to serve Robotnik, but manages to fight them off for a while. That is until Metal Sonic and the now roboticized Sally Acorn blast him with their laser cannons. After the invasion, Omega finds a distraught Hope Kintobor crying, after her Flame Shield gadget begins to die down. Despite not being programmed for comfort, Omega does his best to try and calm her down.
Like in Treasure Team Tango, Omega is starting to become more of a comedic character, a trait that will persist for the rest of the series and continue into the IDW comics. Even so, he's not yet at the point where he cares little for organic life, as Omega not only tries his best to comfort Hope, but he also hesitates to attack the Egg Paladins, and uses only non-lethal force to fight them. I'm sure that guy will be fine.
Soon after this, Sonic and Mega Man would cross paths when the evil doctors would join forces. While not having much of a main focus, Omega was present at the Skull Egg Zone, helping his comrades in fighting off an army of robot masters. And then the Super Genesis wave happened, along with a botched attempt at Chaos Control, which meant that Omega was forced to go through a rebooting process.
Yep, this is the last we see of Omega in the original timeline. Not a lot happened here, and Omega only gets 2 lines of dialogue, but it was still nice to see Omega do what he does best. Destroying inferior robots, Robotniks or otherwise.
Now let's move on to the new timeline. Here, Omega's backstory is more similar to his game counterpart. Starting off as an abandoned robot locked in a room where Shadow was being kept, Omega joined Shadow and Rouge to fight off Robotnik, and later joining Gun, especially when things got messy when the Black Arm aliens invaded. Which leads us into the Shadowfall story arc. Despite their success in defeating Black Doom and his army back then, it turns out there are still more alien creatures heading straight for the planet. Team Dark, along with Gun, are sent on a mission to infiltrate this new Black Comet and destroy it. As you would expect, Omega enjoys himself blasting away at the creatures and even fighting off Shadow, who was under their control for a while. Despite everyone doing their part and eventually destroying the aliens and their comet, one certain member, Eclipse the Darkling, managed to escape.
In the new timeline, Omega is starting to become more and more apathetic to organic life forms. When Rouge asks if he'll be fine after the Black Arms release the paralyzing gas from the end of Shadow the Hedgehog, he takes the time to brag about how superior he is while insulting her biology. He also reacts to saving Spider Troop by making it clear he was not that concerned about their well-being. However, while he also revels in the idea of proving who is stronger between Shadow and himself, even going so far as to promise to maim him, he admits that Shadow would eventually heal, and when Commander Towers calls Shadow a liability, Omega not so subtly threatens him, indicating that he does still care for Shadow. He reluctantly admits that he not only tolerates Shadow and Rouge, but trusts them, even though it's a bit of a backhanded compliment. Also, I just love that there's this part where, after Omega taunts Eclipse into transforming, Rouge hypothesizes that he might not be able to sustain the transformation for long, and a prolonged battle might revert him to normal. So Omega declares,
Understood. Engaging in battle. For science!
Oh, and I had no idea that the Archie counterparts of these characters can't breathe in space? How strange. For all the way that the Archie comics famously made these characters overpowered, it's weird that they have a weakness that their primary canon counterparts don't. A quick fun fact here, the name of the ship they take to the new Black Comet is called the UFSF Ratatosk, named after the squirrel of Norse mythology that runs up and down the world tree Yggdrasil, shit-talking the eagle at the top and the snake at the bottom into hating each other for his own amusement.
We now move on to the Total Eclipse story arc. Team Dark, along with Dr. Julian Snively, are sent to Angel Island after receiving updates that Eclipse shuttle crash-landed somewhere on the island. They find Knuckles chatting with Relic the Pika and her assistant Fix-It, and ask for his help in finding Eclipse.
Is that a fucking geezoid?
So now he, Rouge, and Omega explore the island while Shadow and the others stay behind to watch over the Master Emerald. They find Eclipse's shuttle, believing that he's still inside, but they are contacted by Fix-It, who tells them that he's actually at the Master Emerald Shrine. They rush back there, only to be late to the party, as Shadow has sent him flying into the distance. After that tough battle, Shadow decides to go along with Dr. Snively's idea of moving the Master Emerald to Gun headquarters, in order to secure it, knowing that Eclipse would use its power for his own evil ways. Omega agrees to this idea, but Knuckles is against this, and fights it out with Shadow on the island. While that's happening, Eclipse returns to the altar for round 2. This time, he has the Dark Arms creatures to aid him. Omega doesn't waste any time at attacking the alien creature, but Eclipse makes short work of the robot. Fortunately, Fix-It was able to help get Omega back up and running again, who in turn helps Rouge fix her shoulder after it popped out of place during the fight against Eclipse.
I absolutely love the relationship between Omega and Fix-It. Omega is completely incapable of even comprehending a robot that not only doesn't destroy things, but fixes them instead. What an alien idea! It's not only an unusual concept to him, but an absurd one as well, and it clearly bothers him.
The next time we would see Omega would be in the second Sonic and Mega Man crossover, Worlds Unite. But unlike last time, Omega only gets a brief cameo when a gun carrier from Sonic's world and a government building from Mega Man's world are being fused together thanks to the Unity engines combining both worlds, which ends in a giant explosion and destroys Omega.
Well, that's a bummer. The rare instance where having a cameo is worse than not appearing at all. The Chaotix could have been in that building, but because they're never shown, we get to assume they weren't, and therefore they get to live. Team Dark appear in only one panel, which seals their fate.
Fortunately, everything is reset back to the start from before the crossover event happened, so Omega is still in one piece.
Hooray for time travel shenanigans.
The last time we would see Omega in action would be in the story arc Shattered. After Knuckles shatters the Master Emerald to stop Gun and Eclipse from getting their hands on it, he, along with Amy Rose, are on a time limit to find the shards and bring them back to the floating island before the planet is restored. They pay a visit to King Nigel Acorn for permission to look through his lands for the shards, only to bump into Team Dark again, who also want the King's permission. But their mission involves finding Eclipse after they believe he's landed somewhere on Westside Island. So both teams travel deep into the Mystic Cave Zone. They decide to split up into smaller teams, leaving Omega to be the Lone Ranger for a while. But instead of finding Eclipse, he ends up finding Nagus, who uses his crystal magic on Omega to serve him. Now the Mobians are left to deal with the wizard's new minion, which we might as well call him Crystal Omega. After quite the lengthy battle, they are successful in freeing Omega from the crystal magic, who is now ready to get revenge against Nagus. After a brief setback for the team being trapped in Crystal, after Nagus reforms the Master Emerald to restore his powers, Team Dark finish off the evil wizard, while Knuckles and Amy get the Master Emerald back to the altar before the island plummets into the now reforming planet.
This is one hell of an accidental send-off to my favorite robot guy. He gets to be a major focus for a bit, even if it's because he was taken over by Walter Nagus. Even so, Omega gets to be a badass even after they rescue him. Notice the fact that he can just casually blast a hole through a crystal wall that even Knuckles couldn't break? That's saying a lot for Omega's firepower. As I said, it's no wonder he's so proud of it. And I know we're talking about Omega, but I just gotta take some time to appreciate Rouge and how adorable she was when they found the giant yet seemingly powerless emerald. Look at her happy little smile! She was so excited to find a giant gem that she wouldn't even have to fight over.
And that's the history of E-123 Omega, the rebellious and powerful robot. So, what are your final thoughts on Archie's take, Sala?
It certainly started off interesting. The idea that Omega was granted Gamma's soul and that turned his life around was an interesting direction, even if it got abandoned almost immediately. Omega in both Archie and later in IDW became kind of a comic relief character who says funny things and brags about how superior he is to all the meatbags around him. While in canon, Omega has never particularly showed care or concern for anyone other than Shadow and Rouge, he was also never this hostile towards organic life forms. In fact, in Sonic Heroes, when Rouge begins to suspect that Shadow may be just another one of the Shadow androids they discovered on the Egg Fleet, leaving the real Shadow to be dead, Omega takes notice of her distress and reassures her that in order for there to be copies, the original must exist. This to me is how Omega should behave, stoic and steadfast, but not heartless, and I feel like the comics push him too far in the direction of just being a knockoff of HK-47 from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Which is perhaps appropriate because Omega actually first behaved like this in Sonic Chronicles of the Dark Brotherhood, which was also made by BioWare, and the comics seem to have just adopted this interpretation of Omega. Even so, while he may not behave quite like the Omega I initially fell in love with way back in 2004, a good comic relief character is always appreciated, and there are certainly worse fates that a character could suffer. At least Omega is enjoyable, which is more than can be said for a certain one of his friends. Omega is not portrayed exactly as I preferred him, but perhaps that's for the best. He's got more to him now than just his mission and his relationship with Shadow and Rouge, and that makes this a pretty good rendition of him. If the IDW comics could tone down his hostility towards the organic characters in future issues, while still retaining the humor around him, then the future of this character, at least in the comics, would be very bright. Oh, and also bring back his crush on Blaze. That was adorable. I loved it so much.
Yeah, the Blaze X Omega gag, it was pretty funny. And I do agree that the whole insults against organic life form could be toned down a little, because it does get a bit repetitive after a while. As for me, I find his Archie Sonic counterpart better. I already mentioned in my Gamma episode, and seeing both Omega and Gamma together is a fanboy's dream come true, and it feels like Omega has the upper hand with how he mocks Gamma's outdated equipment. And despite succeeding at what he was ordered to do, his fallen brother gave him a chance to use his power for good. Now this doesn't instantly change him into a goody-goody, he still enjoys destroying anything. I guess that's why I like the comics version more. He's just a prime candidate when it comes to dark comedy. And of course having some fun body language, like seeing him jumping for joy and being all like, yeah, I get to blow shit up! And despite his mass carnage, he does care for his teammates from Team Dark, for the most part. Something that I wish the games would do more is it comes off as a bit too robotic. I mean, yeah, he's a robot, but still. It just doesn't help that Omega has had only a handful of appearances in the games, not to mention the fact that his voice is constantly changing whenever he shows up. As for the new timeline, it's more or less the same as before, just having his history be more closer to the games, so there's not much to say there. I guess we could briefly mention some scrapped ideas for the character that are interesting to point out. Like, one idea was that originally he was planned to make his first appearance in issue 175, where he would attack Knothole and later kill Tom Eternal. But Sega rejected the idea, which seems to imply that Omega was considered off-limits for a time. I guess that Omega Care Unit suit from the anti-Mobius universe was more of a placeholder for the real deal. And the other scrapped idea would have revealed that Omega's main power source are the cores from Sonic Heroes. Yeah, not much to say there. It just would have been a nice little nod to his first game appearance. I guess the only thing I would have liked to see more of is stuff with Omega before joining Gun. He could have been quite the deadly threat to Sonic and the Freedom Fighters. Out of all the members of Team Dark, I feel like Omega is the only one that's been treated better. Shadow used to be cool with his history and all that, but ever since the 2010s, he became a very generic edgelord. And if you've seen the Dissected Alive series that me and Sala are part of, then you'll have already know that we're not the biggest fans of this Flanderization take on Shadow that we've been stuck with for over a decade now. Rouge is a little better with how she's been handled over the years, but nowadays it feels like the whole secret agent aspect of her character has been largely abandoned, and now she's just 100% Jewel Thief. Still, I think we can both agree that we really miss that Team Dark dynamic that really hasn't been relevant in years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry to dwell on the game canon too much again, but I don't think it's a big secret at this point that Shadow's story is easily the best part of Sonic 06, and a big reason for that is how the relationship between Team Dark is portrayed. Not just as teammates, but as genuine friends who care about each other. There's this twist near the end where Omega is revealed to have betrayed Shadow in the future, and the visible heartbreak all three of them go through really cements how much these characters trust and care for each other. But the channel Characters in Depth already made a much better video on the subject than we can get into right now. It's called Why I Love Team Dark, and I highly recommend you go watch that next if you haven't already.
Might as well, he does make some good videos. Oh yeah, since you brought up his IDW Sonic counterpart, I might as well give my quick thoughts on that as well. For the most part, it's more or less the same as his Archie Sonic counterpart, but he does have a few standout moments, like in the 2022 annual special where he and Jameil spar off against each other. That was pretty cool. Well, that takes care of this character file, so until then, I gotta juice!
Juice and jam time!
The damage is severe, but localized. Given enough time, I can repair him. He must also not menace me further.
No promises.